When most people think about physician burnout, people usually think about long clinic days and death by 1,000 clicks. But what if the real source of burnout is losing time with patients? Today, my guest is Dr. Diane Reidy-Lagunes, the Chief of Medical Oncology and Associate Vice President of Oncology Services at Duke University Health System. Before joining Duke, Dr. Reidy was a senior leader at Memorial Sloan Kettering. What I really admire about Dr. Reidy is how candidly she names the challenges in oncology without sugarcoating it. In our conversations, we explore what burnout really means for physicians and how technology can actually serve as a retention tool. We also dive into how AI is helping restore compassion at the bedside, something Dr. Reidy is extremely passionate about. Finally, we tackle the challenges of adoption. How can leaders build the trust needed for technology solutions to succeed? This conversation is all about what it takes to keep both doctors and patients whole. Let's get into it. Thanks for joining the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Super excited to be here.
Diane, you had a really interesting path to becoming an oncologist that I would say, wasn't as conventional as most. So I wanted to kind of start there. Can you share a little bit about kind of you and your journey?
Absolutely. So thanks again for having me. I'm Diane Reidy. I'm the Chief of Medical Oncology here at Duke in North Carolina. And like you said, my path was a little bit less conventional in that I decided to go to medical school a little bit later in the academic journey. I was deep into probably my sophomore year in college. And so when I applied, I felt like I was spinning my wheels a little bit and really tried to push it. There was no such thing as a gap year in my very working class family. Like you got a job or you went to school, but you kind of didn't just try to figure things out with a year or two in between. And I was waitlisted at 8 schools and thinking that I would get off the wait list. End of summer came and it didn't. And it was a disappointment, but that failure became sort of an opportunity, as they say, if find a failure, try it again, and it becomes, next time more intelligently with an opportunity. So I actually went to Madrid, Spain, where I was a bio and chemistry teacher for a year. Had the time of my life. And then all 8 medical schools accepted me the following year. But I think more importantly, I then, into my first to second year of medical school, met my Mexican husband and now have bilingual children. So I do feel like sometimes the universe helps you out and it may not be what you want, but you get what you need. So I always say for folks that are trying to get into medical school and get frustrated because of MCATs and grades and I got a B, like, it's okay. The dreaded B, you can still pursue your dreams and do what you want to do. It just may take a little bit of the road less traveled.
It's funny, I'm shocked that you were able to live a year in Spain and then you decided to come back to med school. I feel like if I was in your position, I would still be in Spain.
That is true. It was an amazing year and met some of my closest friends over there. So it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. So I think, that the unconventional path, seems to connect in a way that I deeply resonate, at least in some of the conversations that I've had with you in the past, just about the way kind of you approach care, right? I think you describe oncology as kind of like this marriage between science and compassion. And so, I kind of wanted to ask you, how do you personally live out that balance in practice and how do you bring that kind of mindset to the way you see patients?
A cancer diagnosis is probably the most terrifying moment that most of our patients and their families will have, or at least one of them. And so my responsibility is to help them in that journey. And I think oncology sort of demands that. It's an enormous honor and privilege, but it's also an enormous responsibility. It also demands that you understand the science, especially today, right? Like, thank heavens, technology has taken off. We learned and understand so much more about the thousands of diseases we call cancer. And so you have to have an understanding of the language of the science, and especially in academic medicine, where I say that we have a responsibility for patients of today and tomorrow through the clinical trials and the scientific discovery that we're trying to pursue. So I think you need to have that science piece as part of the deal and understanding that. But you also have to recognize that human aspect of how terrifying the diagnosis is and how important that compassion is to understand where the patient is to meet them there. Because all patients are, it's different tones and it's different places that they're going to be. And sometimes they may be in one place, but their family is in another place. And I always say cancer is a family disease. And so how do you navigate all of that? And that's not something they teach you in med school, right? And I think in some ways, to your point before, a couple of years off gave me the insight to understand people a little bit more, different cultures, different understandings. And it was such a blessing and a gift to have that. And unknowingly, I think I brought that into my career as an oncologist. So I think to me, that's a very, very special place to be in a place where I love to understand the science, but then bringing that back to the bedside and helping our patients is incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree with you more. I think, in my own experience, the science is super important. And I think all these amazing breakthroughs that we're seeing, they're incredible. But at the end of the day, like, how do you implement that at the bedside in a way that people really resonate with and can understand? Because, quite frankly, like, a lot of people don't know a lot of the medical jargon. It's like you're reading like a legal contract and you don't know what all these words are. You're trying to
100%.
figure it all out, and it's so important that oncologists can recognize that and say, hey, like, my job is to look at the science and stay updated on what is the best kind of therapy options for the patient. But at the same time, how do you help them through what's arguably probably one of the most traumatizing diagnoses to receive.
Yeah, and it's like Maya Angelou said, you may not remember what they said or what they did, but you'll remember how they made you feel. And
Yeah.
I think that is incredibly important. Like, yes, we want someone who's competent and understanding, and we understand that you spent your 20s in the library and in the hospital, dedicating to a profession that really makes tremendous strides. But if you can't translate that to English and show someone you care, it's sort of like you're missing a huge part of it. And I think most people go into medicine and oncology because they feel that way. But there is a skill there, right? That you want to make sure that you got. And sometimes there's not a lot of transparency and feedback to the doc to be like, you know what, you missed a little bit. And I think we're going to get to that later on. And like, how do you teach the doc to communicate better and provide that feedback, which I don't think we do so well sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good transition because I think a lot of times as technology is getting adopted in medicine, people think that, technology is really dehumanizing care. I think up to this point, a lot of the physicians and oncologists that I talk to, talk about how they have kind of this bad taste in your mouth of implementing technology. But I think, with some of the latest advancements and how technology is evolving, you start to see kind of this paradigm shift where there's really an opportunity for technology to actually humanize care and really help bridge those communication gaps, fill those blind spots, and supporting not just the medical side of things through like clinical decision support and all these other amazing tools, but also the emotional side of things. I'm curious, like, as a clinician leader now, like, how are you starting to see kind of AI making impacts into the organization, both at the bedside and kind of at the organization level?
We are at an inflection point, and I do think we're having a revolution. I think we all feel that in AI and how disruptive it's going to be. But the life-saving promise of the place in healthcare that it's going to be is just so incredible. And I think up until now, I actually think technology was interference. A lot of our electronic medical records, honestly, were based on Billy. They were not based on the patient experience or the clinician experience. They were based on how you could essentially document what you had to do to get the right bills. And it has iterated, thankfully, and incredible opportunities like what you're doing and others, especially with the artificial intelligence, have made that at least now on sort of version 2.0 to, okay, how do we drive efficiency and innovation to help us with discovery and with compassionate care? And I think that's where that inflection point is right now. And, you and I had talked about like burnout. And I think what physicians and clinicians, nurses, APPs, and docs feel that is so incredibly frustrating is burnout is not working to see 40 patients in a day. I actually can do that, and I love doing that, and I would continue to do that. What burnout is the ability to not see the patients because I have to be chained to a computer. Like, I refuse to see a patient with cancer in the clinic and look at a computer screen. I just can't do it. It's just not who I am. And yet people find that they're not, like, their doctor's no longer talking to them. They're talking to the computer because they got to document it all, And so when did that happen? How did that happen? That it's almost like I actually grieved when we moved on to the electronic medical record of my old institution, that moment, because I just can't do it. I can't open a screen when I'm supposed to be talking to a patient about potentially that their cancer has progressed or that, that they have incurable disease.
Yeah.
It's just sort of like, where's the compassion there? But now, thanks to folks like yourself, now I could say, we're going to record this so that you and I can be able to have this conversation. And a scribe could help me document what I need to document and do all the things that I need to do. And so we could bring back that compassion to the bedside, literally and figuratively, by not worrying so much about that administrative burden where if, docs would say, well, if I don't do it now, I'm going to have to do it at 10 o'clock tonight instead of being with my family. And so
Exactly.
that sort of either or is now something that you don't have to choose, which I think is incredibly exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I always say that, sometimes it feels that like healthcare is being lost in kind of the science and the administration of it all. And, when you talk to, different leaders in healthcare that sit on other sides of the table, those things are also important, right? Like you need to make sure that you're documenting the care so that you can hand it off to somebody else and they can actually get kind of read up on the patient. You need to do the billing and coding so that you get reimbursed for the care. All these things are important, and there's so many different optimization functions. I think our perspective is really, there's a lot of work that can be done, and it's better done by a computer or AI. And there's work that, an AI will just never be able to do, right? I don't think, maybe you can think of a robot holding somebody's hand and like looking in the eye and really, having the same kind of connection as a human. But I think that is a much harder hill to climb than us, using AI, applying that to some back office workflows. We're starting to see this really kind of play out in the industry. I remember when I started the company, people were talking about the triple aim. And then there was this big kind of movement shifting from the triple aim to the quadruple aim and adding, physician satisfaction
Right.
into, and I was like, that should be so obvious. Why? Who came up with the triple aim in the first place? Like,
1,000%. Yeah. I mean, my CEO, Dr. Albanese here at Duke says, you all have to be chief retention officers. And, people would say to me, well, where are they going to go if they it's the same everywhere. But, in a scary way, a lot of physicians are completely jumping ship because they're tired of it. They're like, that's not what I signed up for. So they're going into biotech and industry and other places. And we can't afford that. We desperately need more physicians. And so I think a major solution is an AI. I really think that we are at this cusp now and this inflection point that thanks to the technology and the ability to just allow that efficiency there so that you can focus on what matters is just going to be able to sort of like allow us to ride the wave that there will be less concerns about attrition and folks just sort of saying, I had enough. And I
yeah,
think we, and we can't forget. I mean, everybody wants to pretend that the pandemic didn't happen, but it hit us. It hit everybody in all different areas of healthcare. And I think that piece is still there. And so we're sort of still climbing up that hill. I'm like, okay, how do we get back to a place where people remember why they chose healthcare and how incredibly fortunate you are to be traveling with people in their most vulnerable times and healing and providing that gift.
yeah. I mean, I think COVID was really illuminating moment in
And
healthcare, and it really forced leaders to rethink how care should be delivered. And it gave us kind of an opportunity to make some bolder decisions that I think otherwise would have not been made. And there were wins, like I think a lot of wins through that experience, but at the same time, a lot of losses, right? But at the same time, like I think taking that experimental approach, being willing to innovate and make those bold decisions is what's really going to kind of push us forward. The challenge with AI today, I think, is, a lot of the work that we do, really, I think, alleviates burnout, right? And burnout in the way that you've defined it, in the sense of, hey, like we are, taking care of all of this, non-value added work to the patient, right? Maybe it's value added work to the organization, but it lets the physician really focus
Right.
on the patient. But I think the challenge is really like when you start having this ROI conversation, right? And they're saying, wow, like, show me the time savings or show me how much more patients my docs are saying. A lot of that kind of story gets lost in the numbers, right? Because, a lot of times, we talk to clinicians and they're like, this is, the greatest invention that we've ever, used. I love this technology. It's saving my marriage. I'm going to work, so much longer. And then you go to kind of the ROI conversation. Yeah, we do show them time saving. We do show them improvements in billing and better capture of data. But at the end of the day, it's this hard ROI conversation of like, how do you really put a price on happiness? And how do you get the organization to really back that as a strategic mandate, knowing that all these other things are going to fall into place?
Yeah, I mean, I could share in the oncology space, like that chief retention officer role that I play as division chief is critically important. And it is expensive when you lose docs. And so there is something to say about, why do I want to stay here as opposed to going somewhere else? And if not this hospital, it will be somewhere else. So there is no question that AI technology is going to happen, because some CEO is going to say happiness matters, because that's when they stay. And creating culture. I mean, they say all the time, culture eats strategy for lunch, right? So you have to create a culture of people of belonging that want to be here, that feel like their job is fulfilled, and that we're making it as efficient as possible so that we can get out of your way and you could do what you do best, which is doctor, right? Or care for patients, whether it's nursing or APPs or docs included. So I think that there's tremendous value in that argument in and of itself, because I could tell you, like, the competition's fierce and everybody's trying to grow their programs with very small margins, and it's getting harder and harder, and it's going to continue to be challenging. So what is your differentiator, and how do you make your environment special? And this is one tool to potentially use.
Yeah. So I know you guys have had experience with ambient at both, MSK where you were at and at Duke today. I'm curious, can you just share a little bit more about kind of what are some of the outcomes that you've seen? How did you kind of implement the solution? How do you, develop trust with the physicians to use the tool? Can you share a little bit more about your experience with ambient specifically?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think AI, we're very, very excited, right? So I think for the efficiency piece, that's sort of where we're on the cusp of like, here at Duke, we used a lot in allowing to have these AI scribes help us. Well, like I said before, when I'm with a patient and I'm having those moments to talk to them and their families, I have someone else in a scribe setting, being able to document all of that. I think it's critically important, because I could tell you how many times I actually would even forget things that I was supposed to put in a note and never did. So it's incredibly helpful for comprehensive care to be able to do that. I could even envision, like, the scribe does a phenomenal job at really thinking or sort of synthesizing and compiling a summary of that. But one could imagine even like the whole transcript of that to share with a patient, so that when they have questions, because, they always say, like, it's a fraction of what we say that our patients and their family members actually remember. So what a potential huge resource to be able to use that as we move on. So I think on the efficiency space, we are absolutely thrilled. I think in the clinic space, that's an example. In the research space, there's lots of opportunities, I think, to just make it so much easier. Like, I believe strongly, particularly in academic institutions, in the oncology space, clinical trials are a big part of what we do. Like, we have to really focus on what's the best therapy to give patients, and many times it's clinical trials. And so how do we do that in today's world where you have to see so many patients and requires so many resources? Are they eligible? Are they not eligible? And so you can envision, and we are already seeing ways that AI can very quickly, we can leverage to sort of say that patient's eligible or not in seconds. A quick look into the electronic medical record in a very exciting way, we could figure out if that patient is not only eligible for the trial, but what trials are available based on their genetic sequencing that's already in the medical record. So all of a sudden, we have, again, from the clinic and research perspective, day to day for that patient in a much more efficient way. AI, however, even in the research space and or the clinical space of improving our care is already happening. So in radiology, for example, we've been using AI for years. Mammograms, for example, there's hundreds and hundreds of pictures and images that we have. And so the radiologists, they don't look at all of that. They actually use AI to kind of consolidate a lot of that. And AI, we're finding, is actually probably better than the radiologist, at least for looking for benign lesions. The ones that are more complicated, you need the radiologist. They're not going out of business yet, but you can envision, like, there's more and more of that type of thing in imaging that we're super excited about, to be able to say, you're in a matter of seconds, again, this is benign or this is not benign. And then critically important, we're hoping and expecting to say that the therapies that now, as most times in the cancer oncology space with scans, we have to say to a patient, come back in 8 to 10 weeks, and then we'll tell you if this is working or not. AI has the potential, and it's already happening, to say in a matter of a week or two if it is or isn't responding, based on huge amounts of data that they've been able to sort of test and validate, to say, we know now sooner rather than later if this is working, to sort of prevent the side effects of therapies that aren't helping, but then also enrich a patient population that we know are going to benefit and get them, the right treatments that they have. So I think radiology is a huge place where it's going to and/or is taking place. Dermatology is a huge place, right? So visual images like that, where you have big databases. When I was at MSK, I had interviewed on a podcast I had called Cancer Straight Talk, someone named Dr. Alan Halperin. And he, as far back as 10 years ago, saw the potential for AI. And so he created a consortium, because the problem, as you know, is that a lot of the databases now are unique to the institution. But to teach the machine to learn, we got to play together. We got to figure out how we're going to get the game so that all players are, all hands are on deck here, and you're not just focusing on MSK or Duke or something like that. And so they created a consortium of dermatologic images so that the AI machine can learn all these different sort of malignant lesions of the skin and actually do better than what we're doing today. So that's another example of a beautiful, where you can envision just camera taking pictures of you, instead of like what you do now, where you may have 10 biopsies of things that may or may not be real. And then the AI is going to say, that's the one you biopsy, and all of 9 others are fine. So I think radiology, dermatology, and then science discovery. And that's, again, it's taken off. It's incredibly exciting on not only understanding protein structures, but what that protein looks like, but really kind of thinking about, particularly with the understanding that we have to be careful about privacy and de-identifying all the information that we're dealing with. But you can envision, with all that machine-based learning, the opportunity to really focus on a patient based on their genetics, radiology, clinical care, and then having AI help us know what is that right patient therapy in a personalized approach, which it's going to happen in the next couple of years, which I'm really excited.
And it's amazing, because it's like, what I find the most interesting sometimes is that, sometimes the models end up outperforming humans, because there are certain things that are imperceivable by humans that, a model or a machine could really pick up on. And you see that a lot in kind of the computer vision space in radiology or dermatology, where, if you, give the same scan or give the same image to, 100 radiologists, you might get a larger discordance in terms of what they're actually seeing versus a model that is trained on kind of thousands of images, more images than a single, radiologist would see in their lifetime.
Yeah.
Right. And so there is not only like this opportunity to, make things faster, make things more efficient, but actually improve the overall quality of care, which is, I think really fascinating to think about.
Yeah. And it's exciting. We also have value-based care. I think that cost of healthcare is very high. And if a lot of the machine-based learning can do it better than us, again, we're not going to make doctors go away or clinicians go away, because we need them but if we could improve some aspects of care that we deliver, and I think, science is iterative, and human nature, we're imperfect, and AI may, we need to teach it, and we're not there yet for the vast majority of things that we're hoping and expecting it will do, but it's going to get there. And we're talking even in the treatment space already diagnosed. What about for like early detection and/or prevention, where you see a lesion that's concerning that could transform? Like you could see even before you get that cancer, like maybe in other things, whether it be a suspicious lesion in the lung that could potentially transform. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities as we move forward to use it in different spaces.
Yeah. I think what's exciting about kind of Ambient in particular is that, for the first time ever, you have, these patient voices being recorded at scale, right? And it's not just what they're saying, it's how they're saying it too. And it really opens up a completely new dimension of things that are like, imperceivable to the average physician. But, I've we had a guest on the podcast named Sean Kozin. He would talk about how there's so much research around vocal biomarkers. Sometimes he would talk to a patient on the phone, and he would pick up that he's seeing signs of brain metastasis on the call, and then he makes the test, and he's like, wow, what if we can do that at scale? And there's so much research there that I think for the first time ever, you actually have the opportunity to take that research out of the lab and put it actually into practice.
Yeah, I love that podcast. And I could totally see that. And I think it also goes back to, first, I think that's absolutely fascinating that based on the tone of the patient's voice, he could subtly pick that up. I think that that's a skill because of who he is. But that's trained too, right? I think that we could teach doctors or the programs to do that so that we could recognize those changes. And like I said, we don't know what we don't know. So I think that could be incredibly helpful. I also think that even just a summary of that first visit with a patient, let's say, patient's terrified. I think they understood exactly what was happening. You could envision based on how they respond, if they actually really did understand what we're doing, or be like, actually, they totally have no idea what you're talking about. So I think that there's subtleties there that we could actually use to educate ourselves. I'm like, we got to go over this again because we thought they understood, but they didn't.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the innovation happening is really helping us kind of understand what is the genotype of these patients and how do we actually provide them a personalized kind of treatment plan. And I think, what we have an opportunity to do with these transcripts, right? And literally having every single word that is shared to the physician is that we have a new perspective on what is the phenotype of the patient. Right? How do you actually understand all their preferences? How do you understand their social determinants of health? How do you understand all these other things that I think oftentimes as an oncologist, you tend to just not document. A lot of times oncologist becomes their primary care physician, and there's, seeing patients and treating kind of things that are outside of, what I would call pure oncology. But they could be important. They could be relevant. And so there's this kind of marriage that I think is about to happen between a lot of this amazing work that we're doing on kind of the genotypes and understanding things that you can kind of really run through, a lab test, and marrying that with, okay, not just profiling patients based off of what their genetic profiles are, but also profiling patients based off of all the other factors that should be relevant to their care that I think previously was just a lot of times it was just not documented.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes, we published a study with the Journal of Clinical Pathways around 2 weeks ago, and we show a 45% increase in the capture of social determinants of health using, ambient software. And so it's just it's efficiency and reducing burnout. It's such an amazing outcome, and we need it because we have an increasing shortage of physicians and, have an increasing demand for care. But at the same time, it's if you take a step back, you're like, wow, something's happening right now that can really change the way we treat patients.
Yeah. I mean, we always say we want to take care of the patient, not the disease, right? And I think this piece on, we call it patient's performance status. Are they strong enough to get their treatment and care? But so much the social determinants are actually equally, if not more important than, are they able to walk around the block? Who's going to take them to treatment? Who's going to be their support system? What is their situation with jobs and insurance? Our country is really broken when it comes to this space. They need to work. And so they're not going to be taking their medication. Did you know that they can't take their medication because they can't afford it? These are real profound challenges that we have in our country today. And I think the ability to pick up those incredibly important issues that, quite frankly, and guilty as charged, I don't ask enough because I'm so focused on the life and death situation of the cancer that I'm missing all of this. And so you can imagine with a program like that and with a script, the very subtleties of who do you live with? And then all of a sudden they say something and then AI comes back to me and says, you should probably probe that a little bit more. You could envision the opportunity to sort of identify the blind spots that we all have.
I think those nudges is such a powerful concept. I think a lot of times there is so much innovation happening kind of outside of the clinical workflow. And it's really kind of sad to see when the science was there, right? It's not like we don't know what to do, but we fail to apply the knowledge that we have. And I think a lot of that gap is based off of how do you insert kind of this information into the clinical workflow in a way that's non-intrusive, in a way that's helpful to the oncologists. And I think ambient has like this real kind of interesting opportunity to do that, right? And rather than logging into a different tool, rather than logging into a different portal, we're saying, hey, we can bring this information to the fingertips, put it in the exact time in which we think it's going to be the most helpful, and then word it in a way where we're not giving you a 50-page report, but just saying, hey, here's the little thing, here's a little hint, you can ignore it if you want to, but here's what we picked up on, and could that be helpful? So I think a lot of this innovation really rides on the fact of, can we actually get physicians to trust this technology? Can we get them to adopt this technology to actually record kind of, these things at scale? And I think one of the worldviews that, we at least have at DeepScribe is you need to make these technologies fit for purpose. And in healthcare, I think one of the things that I've had to learn the hard way is that healthcare is not just one industry, right? There's so many little nuances with every single specialty. And, we've decided to take the approach to really focus on oncology, because we've noticed that there are, big differences in the workflow, big differences in the care that they provide, and big differences in the opportunities of what this technology can do. And so I'm curious, with your experience in ambient, can you talk a little bit about how do you drive kind of adoption? How do you drive kind of trust in these tools? Where do you think, a lot of these solutions fall short in terms of not making it kind of fit for purpose for oncology?
I think the easier it is to use, the utilization piece, the more welcoming it will be. I do think that integration of AI and in different levels of healthcare, and particularly in the oncology spaces, is happening and will continue to happen. So I think it's, yes, for some it might be a matter of time to embrace, but I think that the reality is here. That's where we are. There's concerns about privacy and regulatory, and like, what exactly are we doing with this? But I think for the most part, AI in and of itself will teach us how to de-identify. I think, the radiology space of how they have already done that, and then even sort of deconstructed, when they do the face, that they can't even do that. Like, they're very, very careful about that. And I think in this space that the same thing will hold, that the machine itself will probably help us know how to ensure that privacy piece. I think docs, the more efficient and the more helpful it is, like you said, the better off we're going to be. We're sort of still used to this space where we're stuck in time, where we're copying, pasting all these different notes, and they're terrible, right? And they're not clean, they're not helpful. Like you said earlier, we're supposed to be doing this so that we can talk to each other. Interestingly, this is another sort of, I think, opportunity for ambient AI. We speak jargon on these, right? And yet, because of a federal mandate, all of those notes are visible for patients, but they're not in English. They're medical jargon. And so how do we allow our patients to see all these notes, and yet we're not talking to the patient? We're talking to each other to document in the clinical sense, but that doesn't make sense today. So I have patients who are absolutely terrified because they read their radiology scan and saw something in the liver that turned out to be benign. And so they're calling me because we immediately released this because of the CARES Act. And yet we're not writing it in a patient-friendly way. So could you envision AI to say, here's the translated version of what this means to the patient? AI could do that beautifully. The radiologist is like, I'm not going to spend time sort of speaking in English to my patients but that happens every single day, because we have not yet learned how to essentially translate that note or radiology imaging or pathology imaging to a place where the patients and their family members are going to understand. So I think there's also tremendous opportunity there too.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times, you leave the doctor's office and you're getting like a 10-page printout of like just some sort of templated patient education.
Totally.
And I think there's a real opportunity to translate kind of a lot of this medical jargon in a way that someone would actually, understand and, feel more comforted in the fact that they have the, reading level, if you will,
correct,
to understand it. So
the
really
patients deserve that. That's exactly what we should do. We sort of took the first step where we said, It's your medical record. You have the right to read it. But we never translated, to your point, on what exactly we're writing and saying and what does it all mean. And I think that AI can easily help us do that if we, taught it appropriately.
That's actually a really interesting point to bring up, in the context of the question, right? Because with the Cures Act, it's almost adding more work to their plate because they're like, wait, there's another thing that I need to think about before publishing this and knowing that the patient is immediately going to see this. And, maybe one strategy to actually drive adoption kind of in a broader ambient tool is that like, hey, if you are able to, record the conversation, we are going to be able to help you write kind of an after it is a summary that's customized to exactly what you said. Right. And, yes, you're going to have the note too, right? But you're going to have the ability to basically optimize for all these different, stakeholders of the final note without actually having to do the work of, going stakeholder by stakeholder and making sure that you've filled the billing and coding requirements, you've made sure that you've documented it right for the rest of the care staff and then to the patient, et cetera. I think that's a really good point to make.
Yeah. And I think also with the cures, like even pathology, right? So you get your biopsy for the first time and you don't know what it was. And that comes out the second that the pathologist releases the report before the attending even sees it. So you often will see it because you get an email that your results are in. And so suddenly that compassionate care that we talked about earlier, that's so critically important, goes out the window because the patient just found out they got cancer through an email that they now have, and they have no idea what it means. Yeah. And that, like we used to protect the patient and held off. And, now the surgeon's in the OR and the patient's frantically calling and they can't call them back till, the next day or the following for whatever reason. Yeah. And patients want immediate discussions. And I understand it. I get it. It's just, we also are like, there's 8 million balls in the air at the same time. And how you do that. But you could envision an AI program of saying, there may be sensitive information in this. Are you sure you want to open it now? Maybe you want to wait for your doctor to call.
Yeah.
Something like that. Maybe it won't help everybody, but at least a sort of heads up.
So Dr. Reidy, we're almost at time here. And the last question I wanted to ask you is the question that I try to ask all of our guests. But, I think this podcast really talks about the marriage between technology and clinical care. And, there's a lot of listeners of this podcast that really come from kind of my world on the technology side. And, just asking, clinical leaders like yourself, like, what is one thing that you wish we kind of just understood better that, would help make the products better, the implementations better? What is one thing that you wish we would kind of just wrap our heads around?
I mean, I would say, I guess my answer will say, I don't think it's one thing, but I would say keep going. I think that this sort of space of like, how much more can we take out of this type of data? You and I talked about in the past, like, how do we elevate critical parts of the conversations? Like, let's talk about enrolling on a clinical trial or end of life care. How do we highlight those parts of the conversation so that AI can actually share with the patient what exactly I said, why I said it, and what it really means? Because, this happens also every day that, my partner may have said something to somebody and they're like, oh my God, he told me I'm dying. And, my delivery is not really necessarily different. They have incurable disease, but the crystal ball is broken, so how do we use AI to elevate those critical conversations and then have it on paper so that patients can really absorb it and digest it? Because as humans, one time is never going to be enough. And we don't have enough time in healthcare to do that, right? And I think to your point earlier, how do we use it to create a holistic patient summary? Be able to sort of like not only elevate that part of the conversation, but really hone in on what was so important about that moment and conversation. And can we and should we, like, why don't patients have their medical records? Like, yes, we have Epic on our phones, but is there a way to summarize it all? And can AI be the place to summarize, particularly in the cancer space? Because patients have the time, they don't know the chemos they're on. Like, maybe they do, but they don't know the doses and other things. And so you can envision a lot more empowering of the patient by having easily digestible information on the phone that patients can use, that you can get for us, to be able to make them feel like, yeah, I do know what's going on, and I can be able to share with the next doctor that comes along in a more comprehensive way what I'm doing, what I'm on, where I am, that kind of thing. And to my daughter or my sister or my husband that didn't make the appointment, could we find nuggets of information that we can share?
Yeah.
So I think there's lots of opportunities to kind of empower the patient to be more aware of what's going on.
So keep going.
Keep going.
It's hard sometimes.
Onward and upward. Just keep going.
All right, Dr. Reidy. I really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you for all you're doing. I'm super excited.